Welcome back to the Block Fuel podcast. Today we are joined by Cody Carbone. We are very excited. He is the VP of Policy at the Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to the show, Cody.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, guys.
I looked at your LinkedIn. You graduated from Syracuse not too long ago. I won't share your age with everyone, but it's a very fancy title that you have, VP of Chamber of Digital Commerce. What does that actually mean? And what are you doing? 'Cause this is somewhat of a newer area to government.
Yeah, absolutely. We are a Chamber of Digital Commerce. We are a blockchain and digital asset trade association. So if you're unfamiliar with trade associations, they're real big in DC. We represent companies on digital asset and blockchain issues in Washington. So with Capitol Hill, with the regulators, companies join our trade association and then wear their mouthpiece on those specific issues. So I lead our policy team. We're really a policy organization at the heart of it. So driving all of our government engagement, our responses to government, our proactive advocacy strategy on all things digital assets, blockchain, trying to get at the highest level, trying to get these technologies to be well understood in Washington and to be accepted.
Mm-hmm. And so what brought you to this? I saw you worked at Ernst & Young for, I think, close to 6 years. Were you always involved with public policy and did that get you to the job today?
Always involved in public policy and Washington at the heart of it, not always involved in the crypto sphere. That was new. So when I was at EY, I was doing their government relations work, as you said, and we had a blockchain consultancy practice. And I started taking them around DC. Mm-hmm. And this was right when Libra and Facebook were popping up and there was all those hearings in the House Financial Services Committee. And I was getting all these questions. Oh, you have that blockchain consultancy practice. Can you bring them in? We're trying to learn what the heck this stuff is. And so then I started to learn, what are we talking about here? This is interesting. This is cool. And I loved EY, no diss to EY, but I got really bored going into members' offices talking about accounting and audit issues. And so when this new set of issues came up with the blockchain and with digital assets, I got hooked. It was completely uncharted territory in DC. And so I was looking for an opportunity to really lead on these issues and make a difference. And that's when I found the chamber and joined that team.
From that, what was your first, say, big win, big project that you was like, all right, we can turn this into a full-time business? Because it has to be a little bit scary leaving something like EY and turning that into, I'm on my own.
Terrified. I was terrified when I left because I was like, man, this is still a really nascent industry. It still is today, a few years later. And it does not have a good reputation in DC. And that has only expounded post the market failures of FTX and Celsius and Voyager. And so I would say my first welcome to the show moment where I'm like, oh, this could be something was just going into members of Congress, their office and seeing that light bulb click when you're explaining the technology and you're explaining the use cases. I think the first conversation I had was going into a member's office and talking about stablecoins and the benefit and cross-border payments and use of stablecoins for remittances and how to make them cheaper and how to send them quicker and comparing them to the legacy processes we have today of Western Union and how much of a chunk they take and how long it takes to send that payment family overseas. And seeing that light bulb go off in a member's head, we're like, oh, that's cool. Can you tell me more about that? There's companies that are issuing stablecoins. Can I meet them? That was the first time where I'm like, oh, there's something here. There's staying power to this. And that's when I got really excited. Now, that doesn't always happen. There are plenty of times where I've gone into a member of Congress's office and they've been like, dude, what are you talking about? Look at me with just a blank face. I had one funny story, if you'll indulge me. There's a older senator. I went in there.
That's not going to help us here.
Yeah, I know. I went in there, very old, and I started talking about Bitcoin. And he goes, all right, let me stop you. Show me a Bitcoin.
I like that.
And I was like, all right, I'm pulling out my phone and showing how you can buy Bitcoin, you can go to an exchange. And he's like, show me a Bitcoin. Here's a $5 bill. Show me a Bitcoin. And I was like, oh, this is what I'm dealing with. There's a knowledge gap here and it's pretty substantial. But with all of the bad moments, because there's been plenty of those, there's been some of those light bulb moments that have really kept me energized.
Now, I guess just riffing a little bit, we're going off the script of questions we had sent over, but understanding that everything with FTX, and FTX was the biggest one that everyone knows about, but there's been a lot about Gox, and there's been a million of these like rug pulls, and constantly you hear about every day there's some sort of crypto being stolen. That happens in the traditional finance market as well, right? And no one really talks about that. There's fines levied out, and $2 billion Wells Fargo sneezes and everything's fine. But this just has that spotlight on it. So what are some of the challenges now? Because you're dealing with the businesses, but then you're also dealing, with policy as they're trying to figure out what this actually is at the same time. Talking with Carol House last week, it sounded like they do actually, and she had a tremendous knowledge of the space. And so it is good to see that people that know what they're talking about are now starting to get involved a lot more. But what are some of like the main challenges that you're having to play as this middleman?
I think there's challenges on both sides. There's challenges when I talk to policymakers, and then there's equal amount of challenges when I talk to our members, and that's like industry and businesses. For policymakers, it's just the lack of understanding of what we're talking about. There's not enough focus from the industry on explaining use cases and taking this technology, which is super complex and it's fairly novel, a lot of it, and making it make sense by comparing it to things that lawmakers can easily understand. Like comparing stablecoins to like remittances and going to your Western Union, that helps them make it come to life. So that lack of education, it only is emphasized by they only read bad headlines. There's not a lot of great crypto headlines. You know what I mean? When Bitcoin goes up to 70,000, sure, it makes a headline, but usually the subheader is, but there was a hack and North Korea Lazarus Group is using it for weapons proliferation, or this company failed and this company failed and this company failed. And that's what these lawmakers read. They don't have time to really get in the weeds and understand the use cases and look 10 years down the road that this can be the future. We've dealt with this with any new innovation. When cars were created, there was all these laws that got promoted that tried to ban cars in favor of horses. Same thing happened with air technology. Same thing happened with the internet. When pets.com and the internet bubble boomed, there was a ton of congressional hearings about banning the internet in some places because it was only used for porn and money laundering and stuff like that.
They're starting to do some of that in certain states.
Yeah, no, and we're facing the same thing here. Like I always say, like we are peak 1998 internet right now, where it's new and it's novel, and there's a group of consumers who are excited. There's a group of businesses who are excited, whether it be traditional finance businesses playing the JP Morgans, the Citis, the Visas, as we've seen, PayPal's, and crypto native companies coming up to compete. It's still so early, but there's still that large population. I would say a majority of the population is like, this still seems bad and scary and shadowy. And so trying to overcome that challenge and bring this industry to life and show, there's real people, real smart people working on this. That's the biggest challenge for that side, dealing with policymakers. On the industry side, dealing with my members, it's as much as there is a lack of understanding from policymakers about how industry works, I have found there's just as big of a lack of understanding of how Washington works, and explaining that to businesses. Like when there's a new law that's introduced, the amount of questions I get or the amount of times I'm told, okay, so that's law, I comply with that. I'm like, no, this bill was just introduced. And explaining, everyone's seen that School of Rock video, like how a bill becomes a law and how regulations work and how the White House works. There's that knowledge gap too. So those I would say are the two biggest challenges, is trying to bridge those knowledge gaps and bring everyone together so we're all understanding each other.
Mm-hmm. No, that's fascinating, because you're as some of these bills pick up steam, you then talk to these companies and say, hey, this is actually seems like it's picking up some steam. You guys should be changing policy in accordance to that then?
Yeah. And trying to be a collaborative partner with the policymakers and with the industry. Hey, if this bill's picking up steam, I'll let you know. There's things you don't like about it. Let's work with them. Let's open up a dialogue. It doesn't need to be this necessary. You don't have to put up this defensive front where you're like, oh, screw them. Like they're coming after me. It's like, they might just be not educated on how your business works. Let's go in there. Let's talk to them and we can fix this. Like we can amend this bill to make it more favorable. It's a lot of that back and forth dialogue. It's a very like organic and creative process, and people think it's pretty like black and white, and it's just not that. The legislative process, the regulatory process, there's a lot more nuance to it than I think people understand.
The one thing we've seen this week that I thought was interesting was articles around people in Congress should be looking at just stablecoins in general as a way to keep the dollar as the reserve currency. And I see someone like yourself as like a key cog in that to educate on, hey guys, stablecoins aren't going to be competing with the dollar necessarily as much as they're going to make it the dollar the reserve currency backing those stablecoins. And you don't see a lot of popular stablecoins being backed by any other currency. So I feel like that education piece is what's missing there on like strategic value in that.
That's one of my biggest talking points going up to Capitol Hill on why we need a stablecoin regulatory framework.
Yes.
It's that reserve dollar piece. And I think the pushback I always get there is, I don't know what a stablecoin is. And it looks like a CBDC. And I think CBDCs are bad. And it's, again, it all stems back to that lack of education. But I use that talking point so often. And that's when you get some of those light bulb moments where it's like, oh, I never thought about the national security implications. We've been taking that talking point and we've been talking a lot about like this BRICS conglomerate. What is it? Whatever it stands for, Brazil, India, Iran, China, Russia, and how they're moving stablecoin legislation in their respective countries because they see the benefit of taking over that reserve world currency status. So I use that talking point all the time. I do think it resonates. It just hasn't become mainstream enough. And hopefully it gets there.
On that same topic somewhat, like PayPal, we saw introduced like their stable coin, right? And then you mentioned like CBDCs. There's other companies that are looking at doing this as well. Like in your just personal opinion, like how do you see this like rolling out? Is there going to be a stable coin for every single company? If I go buy Coca-Cola, I have to have a Coca-Cola stable coin to do so. Like that obviously is not, practical in any imagination. Who wins here? Is it going to be a government? Is it going to be a collaboration of sorts with a PayPal or a monster that's been in the space for a while?
Man, I think that's $1 million question. And I don't know if I have the answer because I just don't think we know yet. I think that there is going to be this fight that is just really starting to brew of privately issued stablecoins and eventually a CBDC or digital dollar. I think, and I'll probably get flack for saying this, but there are so many people who are just completely opposed to a CBDC. There's privacy concerns, which are legitimate. However, if you look at the global landscape, there's over 100 countries right now piloting or researching, launching a CBDC. China's already done it and other countries are doing it. And I think it's naive to think the US will just be the one country sitting on the sideline. And so when you look at it in that context, I think the concern is always from lawmakers, at least what I've heard. And you've seen like a presidential candidate like Ron DeSantis just be like, screw CBDCs, we're not going to have them in Florida. I think the concern is we're always looking at what China's doing. And we just assume that if we launched a CBDC, it would look like China's. And I think that's probably a naive way to look at it. It's no, we can do it better. And we can make sure that those privacy protections are there. And I'm going off on a tangent, but I'll bring it back. Trying to wrestle how a government issued dollar and these privately backed stable coins work with each other, if they can, I think will be the question that we'll have to resolve one day. Right now, because we don't have a CBDC, we're still very much in the concept phases of what that would look like in the US. Well, there is that opportunity for privately issued stablecoins to enter the market and to grow. Once we move forward, because we will have to move forward on a CBDC, and I know people aren't going to like that, but it's just the fact, as I stated earlier, that's going to have to be resolved. We will always advocate for a balance. There's a free market. We believe in capitalism at the chamber. We want those privately issued stablecoins to thrive and survive. But I think you raise a great point. Can every company just have their own stablecoin? That would be chaos. And I don't think we have an answer to that. And I think a lot of companies who want to launch a privately backed stablecoin have been hesitant to do so because there aren't those legal parameters and there isn't that legal framework. But we're now getting to a point where companies feel somewhat emboldened, like PayPal. PayPal was ready to launch this, I know, a year ago. They didn't do it because of the regulatory environment was not great. We're at a point where now companies are going to start saying, screw it. Like, we're falling behind. And I watched PayPal do it and I see how Circle's doing it and I want to go forward. And so what's the solution to 1,000 different privately issued stablecoins? I don't know. Maybe it's the market's just going to play out and people are going to use PayPal's versus Coca-Cola's, as you said, and Coca-Cola's will just fall by the wayside. But I think that's going to be an issue that's going to have to be resolved soon.
Yeah. You can see like the government's potentially working with them. I know like we were talking with Carol again, and it was really interesting to say like constructing and how everything is set up of the structure behind it is important. And they were talking about ensuring democracy and things like that. And so I asked the question back because there was that big thing with PayPal where a lot of people on Twitter were talking about if you say disinformation, they'd be able to pull that off. Now they pulled that from their website right away. So that scared a lot of people as to like, why is that up there? Going back to your concerns of what people have is, okay, if I say something that people don't like or disagree with, am I going to be fined now, or taxes going to be?
And that's the concern with the CBDC, right? Or even some of these privately issued stablecoins. I hear it all the time from lawmakers. If I'm Cody Carbone and I want to buy a gun and I have an anti-gun administration, are they going to go in and then take over or freeze my bank account because I'm using digital dollar? Or if I say something bad about the president, are they going to go in and freeze my bank account? And I think PayPal took that off their website because they got a lot of flack, because that's people's biggest fear is to have people come in and take over their financials. And so I don't know the resolution. The market's going to have to work out where there's going to have to eventually be, whether it be a CBDC or a privately issued stablecoin that preserves people's privacy. That is exactly what the community are looking for. And maybe it'll be a competition where some stablecoins succeed and we eventually just get one or two that everyone's using in conjunction with the CBDC, or maybe everyone uses a CBDC. I don't know the answer, but it'll be very interesting to watch play out over the next few years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cody, I think bringing this back to you in your role with the presidential election coming up next year and people building these platforms, like you mentioned with Ron DeSantis, like, how does this make your role? Like, how does this, you come in and you're like, oh no, like DeSantis has made be super central. I'm going to have to be on the phone like all week. Just give us like your thought process on like how you balance two parties, how you balance 4 or 5 candidates within each of those parties running for president, and like how that you fear, or like maybe you're excited that at least it's mainstream.
Yeah, I would say like my typical disclaimer is this is a nonpartisan issue. Like, we're talking about technology and that everyone should be on board and having it be here in the United States. There should be protections. We want consumers to be able to experiment with this new technology safely. And we want the US to lead. No one wants illicit finance, concerns money laundering, all that. But the case with anything, and I said this to one member of Congress, like, it's nonpartisan. And they're like, that just means it's pre-partisan because everything becomes partisan. We're starting to see that a little bit in DC. And we're seeing it specifically on CBDCs. How do I look at the presidential election and just elections in general? I don't care what party you are. I am a single issue in my role, a single issue voter and supporter. I want you to be open to innovation. That doesn't mean, oh, I don't believe in regulation. We want this industry regulated because there has to be guardrails, as I just mentioned, and it provides legitimacy. But if you're open to innovation and you're a progressive Democrat or you're the most conservative Republican, like, we will find a way to support you and to help boost your profile. I think the issue is that so many elected officials right now have made this black and white, where I'm either pro crypto and I don't know anything about it, or I'm anti crypto because it scares me. And there is nuance to all of it. In presidential election right now, this administration is not favorable to the industry. They have put out a lot of negative proposals that would try to regulate the industry out of existence. We think it's bad posture. The White House has not been a good faith partner. And I think a lot of the work that we are pushing at the chamber, we have allies in Congress, again, both sides of the aisle, Democrat and Republican. We have allies in some regulatory agencies. The CFTC is perceived as more of an ally than the SEC. The SEC has been pretty public in their views against the industry. I think it's safe to say, in Gary Gensler. And so what a new administration can do, whether it's a Republican administration or a Democratic administration, but just a new administration overall, they can really reset the stage and reset American leadership in digital assets. We are losing. And that is, I use this like economic competitiveness talking point all of the time. There are other countries who are opening their doors to this industry, whether it be the UK or countries in the EU or Singapore, other countries in Southeast Asia. There are countries saying, listen, we see this is taking off. Whether you like it or not, there are consumers who are innovating in this space. There are consumers who are purchasing digital assets. There are businesses who are using distributed ledger technology. Whether you like it or not, we want that innovation to happen here. We want that experimentation to happen here. And so we will use our regulatory powers to supervise this, to make sure you guys can grow here and grow safely. The US thus far just has not had that posture. It's like the administration right now is just like turning a blind eye, like, this will go away. We don't want to accept this. And so any administration coming in, I'm looking for just that willingness and openness to work with us. And again, I don't care if you like it or not. just accept that it's here and allow us to experiment and innovate here without just trying to kill us.
What are some of the biggest agenda items for you guys right now? You mentioned stablecoins was a big chunk of that, but like specifically, are there 2 to 3 kind of key areas you guys are focused on today?
Stablecoins is huge. Getting a legal framework for stablecoins, getting clear jurisdictional lines, like who regulates the industry. And what I mean is, what is a digital asset security? What is a digital asset commodity? Understanding that for issuers of tokens, letting them know, like putting clear rules so they know what they're issuing, whether it's security, what's commodity, and who their regulator is. Getting those clear jurisdictional lines for platforms. So exchanges know what they're listing. If they're listing a security or commodity, that's big. And that's a lot in like those market structure bills. And then something that's popping up more and more is 2 things. The regulatory treatment of NFTs is going to be massive. It has been untouched thus far, but it's starting to pop up. The SEC had their first enforcement action. It's an NFT issuer last week. And then regulation of DeFi. Again, something that I still think is pretty new to Washington because there's just a lack of understanding. But we've seen more and more enforcement actions pop up against DeFi. There is DeFi is counter to like regulatory oversight, the whole like genesis and mission of DeFi, but that's just, it will never fly in DC. So trying to resolve those issues there, I think is going to be one of our biggest priorities.
I got to ask about Coinbase. So for those that don't know, a lot of people pick up little sound bites here and there. I'm in the space and I feel like I have infantile knowledge of everything that's actually happening with that. Can you just lay the foundation of what's going on at a high level, and then what's the latest in that case right now?
Yeah. So Coinbase, I think everyone would say one of the good faith actors in this business, one of the biggest exchanges, platforms where you can go and buy your Bitcoin or Ethereum. They are a public company. And so they were registered with the SEC as a public company. They were approved to go public and IPO with the SEC. And they have been calling for clarity because they list a lot of tokens on their platform. And the SEC has said a lot of those tokens are securities. And they're saying, wait a second, we go through a process to make sure we're not listing any securities because we don't want to have to register as a national securities exchange with you. They petitioned for rulemaking saying, we can't keep going down this road of just chaos and confusion. And the SEC hit them with an enforcement action saying, you are illegally operating and listing securities on your, and here are 9 different tokens that are securities. Take them down immediately. You're in violation and we're suing. Coinbase is, dude, like what the heck? Like we have been asking for clarity. Like we have been a good faith actor. Like you, not only that, like you approved us, SEC, to go public. Like you've seen our business. You've seen all of our disclosures. Like you understand us better than anyone. And now you're coming after us when we've gone in many times, just asking like for simple clarity because we want to make sure we're compliant. We want to make sure we're following the law. And if you're telling us that we're listing securities, tell us why. Like, how did you come to that determination that these are securities? So that enforcement action is underway right now. Coinbase is filing for a motion to dismiss, saying this is completely ridiculous. Like, we don't understand. The SEC has no grounds here. We actually at the chamber filed an amicus brief in support of that motion to dismiss, saying the SEC is just acting out of bounds. They're trying to regulate the entire digital asset industry without any delegated authority from Congress. It's not in their legislative mandate. And now we're just in that waiting pattern. So that motion to dismiss needs to be decided by the judge. If it's not decided by the judge, it doesn't mean Coinbase lost. It just means that they're going to go on to trial and more facts will come out. But the SEC has had a pretty tough time in the courts lately. So I'm optimistic it'll come out in favor and Coinbase will be right here. But it could be a while just because the judicial process takes forever.
Yeah. And you mentioned on that specifically filing an amicus brief on behalf of Coinbase. What are other kind of like actions that you take or the chamber takes on behalf of, say, customers you're working with in the industry? And then how do you come to a conclusion on what is the right action? So say with the Ripple lawsuit that came through, and that was a long case. How was your like decision-making process on like, oh, we should speak on behalf of Ripple, or, hey, maybe we don't agree with everything Ripple's doing?
That's the hardest part of this job. Representing 200 member companies, I'm sure you guys can obviously imagine there are a lot of disagreements in what we should do. And so finding consensus is the most difficult part of all of this. The way we do that, and usually it's been fairly easy, but the way we do that is we'll poll our members. We'll get a general idea of what you think we should do. Hey, is this best for the industry? We live and die by that. Is this best for the industry? We try to answer that with everything. If it's questionable and we're not sure, then we'll stay on the sidelines. But each of our amicus briefs, whether it be Ripple or Telegram before that, or now Coinbase and Grayscale, we have thought that it is best for the industry as an industry voice to speak up and to register our complaints with the SEC and with the courts. And how do we decide to do anything is we are very member driven. If a member comes to us and is, hey, I want you to speak up against this bill or this rulemaking from Treasury or from the SEC or CFTC is really great or it's really bad, I think you should do something here. We'll always take that to heart. And that's how we're driven. It's no one cares what I think or I say. I am just a mouthpiece for our members. And yeah. But no one wants me to just be the sole decision maker. And so I always listen to our members. We're very member driven. And so when our members come to us, that's really how we decide what policy decisions we're going to put forward.
So 200, is that like a cap you guys decided on, or is tomorrow's 201 and you guys are continuing to build that out?
Yeah, hopefully tomorrow's 300. Like we just said, we love to keep growing. We love to keep scaling. We have found that there are just every company in the entire world should be interested in digital assets and blockchain technology. We see that there's an opening for every sector to get involved and to learn about these technologies. We're different than I think a lot of trade associations. A lot of people would think we're just like representing crypto native companies, but we represent a lot of traditional financial players and some traditional players in the retail space as well, interested in the metaverse and NFT and like consumer innovation. And so we're constantly growing. So yeah, if companies are listening to this and they're interested in having a representation, a voice in Washington, I don't mean to make a sales pitch, but come talk to me.
I gave you the floor. I gave you a little that one. Just real quick, as one of the last questions here is talking about some of these like real world tokenization. I think that's an interesting concept. And again, going back to that picture of a cat, I always use it as an example for NFTs, but okay, now mortgages and there's all these other areas and different industries, as you said, that are happening. Could you maybe highlight some of the areas that everyday listeners may not think about that, holy shit, like this is actually now coming into this industry? And like how far out are we from mortgages going through that route?
I still think we're fairly far. I think it may be, and when I say that, it may be a 5-year timeline, but I think you named one, housing is a huge one. Really any like record or title or deed should be on the blockchain. You don't want that just sitting in like a paper copy in an office somewhere. Healthcare is another big one. Think about when you go to the doctor's office, your health files from when you went to a pediatrician are sitting there, just a big bundle.
I always found that crazy. You go to a doctor and they don't know what the last information was.
It's insane to me. And that is something that can easily, and we're starting to see like Coral Health is a great company that's doing this. We're starting to see people put health records on the blockchain. So that's one. California is experimenting with putting car titles and deeds on the blockchain. Supply chain is the biggest one. Having Walmart has the biggest private blockchain in the entire world because they will source all of their produce and their meats and veggies. They will source it to make sure that like when they say, hey, this is like grass-fed beef, that they can actually see like they went from this farm, the beef went from this farm and it went through the supply chain and they can all see it on their blockchain. And so supply chain, healthcare, we're starting to see like music. There's a company right now putting cryptographic like voice recordings and songs on the blockchain. Any industry can use this technology to their benefit. Identity is another big one, government identity. But I would I think you're going to first start seeing it supply chain. You probably won't see that at like an everyday user, but I bet you like your merchants that you shop at every day are using it. Healthcare, retail, I would say are the first three.
Sorry. Yeah, that's a good point. I know the counterfeit industry for any like Louis Vuitton and the Hermes bags is massive and immediate value by putting that on the blockchain to validate ownership.
One thing I didn't say, but I think this is the future of blockchain as well, is using an AI. Like we're seeing all of these deepfakes now, or like anyone can go in and write a song with using AI. So like Drake in Future, there was just an AI song completely made by them.
They're good.
And it was good. And so like actually using blockchain technology to authenticate, if Taylor Swift is going to create a song, like to show that it's actually from her and it's not from some deep fake, or she's going to put out a record, an album cover and to show that putting it on the blockchain to show that it actually came from her and not from some random artist, I think that's going to be another huge use case of blockchain technology, the proliferation of AI.
Yeah. I was just saying this because I remember it was a couple months ago now, but there was like a fake bomb in front of the Pentagon and it dropped the market like $6 billion for 2 seconds. It was like the algos picked it up. But like that impact and that level of impact, being able to authenticate images and things like there's that convergence, I think, of AI and blockchain, that value of seeing the authenticity and making sure that it's all public and people can see quickly. I think that will get like with the whole phase of like misinformation and things like that. Like hopefully we'll actually be able to see like the truth behind something with blockchain. So I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. I'll pause here, but we can wrap it up. I don't know if we went through the questions on there. This was awesome though. I thought it was a really fascinating.
That was fun. Yeah.
Do you have any others, Jody, or anything that like we should talk about that we missed on?
No, I thought that was you kept it really concise, but delivered a lot of, I think, really interesting answers on a lot of those pieces.
Cool.
So I'll just wrap it up and then I'll stop and I want to just chat for 2 seconds after. But Cody, thank you so much for coming on the Block Fuel podcast. Really excited to have you and look forward to connecting in the future.
Awesome. Thanks so much, both of you guys, for having me. Listen to the Block Fuel podcast. I'm a fan now.
Let's go.